Hey everybody, what's going on? Helmite here, bringing you another video from Grab the Lantern today. Today I want to talk about Kindred, and how they're a very interesting, balanced challenge for Riot to deal with. And so, this is kind of, they've been out of the meta for a while, and I kind of got to thinking about it, and why aren't Kindred a good champion right now? Why are they so hard to balance? Why is Riot having issues with them? And I realized that primarily the reason why Kindred are so tough to balance is because they're inherently contradictory, in that they are intended to be a marksman jungler. Now, if you really think about how League of Legends is balanced and the kinds of champions, marksmen are generally bot lane champions. They're very weak early, to the point where we have dedicated an entire champion to protecting them in the early game, but they scale incredibly well with items, to the point where if they can hit late game, they can pretty much kill everybody and do lots of damage. Conversely, junglers are frequently very good in the early game. In fact, that's 90% of junglers are intended to be good early gankers, showing up in other lanes. They can survive the jungle by themselves, they can show up in other lanes to kill people, or they can tango with the enemy jungler very effectively and not have to worry about it so much. Things like Lee Sin, Rengar, Kha'Zix all kind of illustrate what I'm talking about. However, a jungler at the end of the day isn't going to scale super well into the late game, for the most part. And so you see the problem. Junglers are early game oriented champions, marksmen are late game oriented champions. So Kindred, by sheer virtue of their existence, are a contradiction, in that they are a jungler, they're supposed to be played in the jungle, but at the same time they're trying to be a marksman, and that leads to weird power spike problems. So, for example, Kindred's passive emphasizes them actually going out and finding the, camps in the enemy jungle and stealing those away, putting them in direct conflict with the enemy jungler. However, they're a marksman. If they do this, they should die. However, in order to facilitate Kindred doing this, though, Riot has given them a lot of tools outside of what normal marksmen have to give them somewhat of a balanced chance of fighting back, and that leads to them supplanting the weak early game that marksmen are supposed to have. Alternatively, if they don't have those tools to fight back against enemy junglers, then they ultimately have no chance as a jungler. They won't be able to farm, they won't be able to gank, and therefore they'll never be able to reach the late game where they'll actually be strong, especially given that the jungle has much less income than other roles. And if you really think about this, farming junglers have always been a problem with balancing. If you remember Seda Devour and Pharaoh Flare before it, really weird items and difficult to balance, because the jungler who sat in their jungle the longest, two things would happen. Either their team would lose in advance because they never spent time ganking, or they would come out of the jungle with their item completed and would annihilate everybody without having to actually fight for the farm like every other position had to. In fact, Riot literally gave up trying to make a farming jungle item specifically because it was so difficult to balance. And Kindred are basically in that weird spot. Kindred and Master Yi, and I think that's why Riot have issues balancing the both of them, in that they exist in a really weird spot where they're supposed to be late game scaling, but they're also supposed to be junglers, and farming jungle just isn't really a thing that Riot have decided to support very well. So, what can we do to help fix Kindred? I think the biggest thing we can do to look at them is to give them not a great late game hyperscaling position like they currently have. There are AD carries like Corki or Lucian who spike really hard in the mid game and then tend to fall off as the game goes on. They just don't do as much damage, they're not as effective in late game teamfights as something like, say, a Caitlyn or a Vayne. And I think that's where we need to balance Kindred, to make it so that they spike in the mid game, but then they fall off late, they aren't quite as effective. And they kind of do this already, but the nature of their passive means that they will continue scaling up damage, and it just ends up being a difficult proposition. So my proposition then is to basically balance them so that they are really good in the mid game. They have a weak early game, they spike hard mid, and then they fall off late. That way they can somewhat get away with being strong kind of early, in the same way that Lucian and Corki are good early. They spike really hard mid, and then once the late game rolls around, they just aren't doing as much damage as they used to, they fall off. And that way they fit more of the profile of a regular jungler, while also still feeling like a marksman, and still feeling like they have their class that they're supposed to be. I would love to hear you guys' thoughts on the topic. I really do like playing Kindred, but I know that I don't play as much as some people, so let me know what you guys think on this whole topic and what solutions you guys might have for fixing Kindred. If you enjoyed this video, go ahead and leave a like, and if you really enjoy this video, consider subscribing. I upload a video every Monday, Friday, and on patch days. Once again, thank you guys so very much for watching. I do appreciate it, and I will talk to you all later.